Kevin Kelly. I'm Senior Maverick at Wired Magazine. I want to talk about what technology wants, and I have 3 points. The first one begins with the world without technology. This was a world where humans only lived to an average age of 35. It was a very, very difficult life. Sometimes people talk about hunter-gatherers having banker hours. Well, this is totally wrong. It was a very severe and challenging environment. It was helped by the fact that humans invented technologies from the very, very beginning of our start. Hammers, swords, knives, for the claws that we did not have. And one of the first things we humans did was to eliminate most of the megafauna animals throughout the world. Easy meat. There were thousands of species, and this changed the entire landscape of the planet once they were removed. The animals that we didn't kill off, we tended to domesticate. Wolves into dogs, goats, and pigs very, very quickly, 10,000 years ago. But really, the very first animal that we domesticated was ourselves. We changed ourselves. And we changed ourselves in many ways, including taming fire to make it into a food technology so that we could cook. Cooking became an external stomach that we could process nutrition in a way that we could not otherwise. And that nutrition changed our jaws, changed our teeth, changed our brains. Once we domesticated herding animals, we could milk them, and we very quickly evolved adult lactose tolerance within a few thousand years. So we marched on with this new technology and changing ourselves, and we settled the entire globe at the rate of about 2 kilometers a year on average. And immediately, very long before the industrial age, we started to change the climate of the planet through the eradication of megafauna, through fire, through other means. So this became the most powerful force in the world. First we changed ourselves, then we changed the plants and animals around us, we changed the environment, and we changed the entire planet. And in that way, humanity is our greatest invention. And of course, we're not done yet. So almost from the beginning, we had this very paradox, which is that we are both creators and the created. We are both the parent and the child at the same time. We are the master and the servant. We are the shaper and the shaped at the same time. And so the dilemma that we commonly have right now about whether we are being run by technology or running technology will forever be the paradox of our lives. Into 1,000 years in the future, we will still have the same dilemma, the same paradox that we are both the creator and the created. And this two-faced aspect of technology is essential to our understanding because it's interwoven. Our humanity is something we invented, and through our invention, we have made other technologies. And so this is an integral part of ourselves. We are a techno species, and that's the #1 point I want to make. We are integral with technology. We ourselves are technological. The second point is that before Darwin, when naturalists and biologists would go out to collect things in the world that they found, living creatures, plants, animals, living organisms, they just made curiosity cabinets. They made catalogs on them. There was no theory about how they were connected together. It was just one organism after another. We are, until recently, been very similar in the technological realm because we have a parade of different technological inventions one after another, but we haven't really had a very good theory or understanding of what connects them together, how they're related to each other, what they mean, how they come about. Even the very concept of technology is very recent, and we're still kind of grappling with what a good definition is. One definition that I really like is that technology is anything that was invented after you were born. Because most of the stuff in our lives that surrounds us right now is technology that's been around for a long time, but we don't think of it as technology. It's concrete pavements, it's lead or it's copper pipes, it's switches, it's wooden shelters. These are all technologies, even things like calendars and libraries, even our law are technologies, but we don't think of them in that way because they're old. We think of technology as the new stuff. Danny Hill says this technology is the stuff that doesn't work yet. And that's sort of a good popular definition. But in fact, technology is a very recent idea itself. Even though it has been around for a long time, we haven't really perceived it until very recently. Even in the 1950s and before, it was hardly ever raised. In fact, the term, especially in English, wasn't invented until 1829, centuries after it had been around and in use, but it wasn't really even apparent to us. I think technology is a cosmic force that has been around longer than even humans have. It is a force that began at the Big Bang, okay? Began at the Big Bang, and at the Big Bang, what's happened since then, and what's the universal rule of all physicists, is that entropy has been increasing, meaning that heat death has been increasing. Everything runs down. And it's not to like a blackness, it's to a kind of a grayness, because there's the point of high entropy means there's no difference. Everything is flat, it's the same. And that is the general drift of the universe, except in a few little corners, few little spaces here and there, and few is relative because there are actually billions of them, but planets would form. And actually, before planets, particles would form. And those particles will form molecules. And these formations would gather through gravity into stars. And stars are self-organizing. The more there is, the more they attract. And so this self-organizational principle would eventually make planets and higher, heavier elements. All these things are examples of self-organization. And self-organization kind of runs slightly counter to entropy. In this local area, we see increasing order over time. And this entropy that decreases is what I call exotropy. This increasing order accelerates the amount of entropy made in the local area, and that's how it works. So this exotropy is self-organization, and technology is an accelerated version of that exotropy. It's an accelerated version of what goes through life. It's an accelerated version of what happens when the primeval universe organized into matter and molecules and stars. And this thread, this chain of matter forming, and then stars forming, and then planets forming, and spiraling galaxies forming, and then life, at least on this planet, forming, and life producing technology, is this chain of self-organization that runs through the universe. And so technology, in that sense, is an extension of that self-organizing force that began at the Big Bang and ran through life. And one of the examples of this is energy density, which has been increasing all along through these different stages, and it's the highest, meaning the amount of energy that can flow through the smallest amount of matter in the smallest amount of time has been increasing. And technology is the most energy dense in the entire universe. Your laptop is the most energy dense thing that we know of, even more than a star. So there is a great arc to technology running through the cosmos. And it began at the Big Bang, ran through the origins of stars and galaxies, and then planets, and then life, and then minds, and will go beyond us. That is the general story of technology. We are just in the middle of that story. And we could say, to a first approximation, that what technology wants is what evolution wants, because it's the same force accelerated. So the natural question would be, well, what does evolution want? Well, evolution also has trajectories. That's controversial. I wouldn't really say it has destiny, but it has directories, it has directions. And those directions are from simple to the complex. It goes from sameness to diversity. Evolution moves from general things to specialization. It moves from independence to mutualism. It runs from dumbness to sentience, and it runs from things that are very hard to evolve to things that are very easy to evolve. So that's the general trends in evolution, and those are the trends that we see in technology itself. So just as there's huge diversity in the living world, we see the same kind of explosion of diversity in the invented, manufactured, technological world. We see the same kind of specialization that happens in life, where you have a general purpose cell, and then over time, a body like ours might have 57 different kinds of specialized cells, like heart cells or skeleton cells or muscle cells. We see the same thing in technology, where you might have a general hammer that does everything, to specialized hammers, to a camera that can do anything, to a specialized camera like a high-speed camera, or maybe an underwater camera, or maybe a high-speed underwater camera. And so that general movement is something we see in technology. We see this huge diversity, and we can even follow kind of a lineage of how variations are made and passed on, almost in the way of this genealogical chart of the shapes of armor, medieval armor, followed what looks like a taxonomical tree. So I would go so far as to say there are 6 kingdoms of life, roughly, in today's understanding, and that technology, in a certain sense, is the 7th kingdom that came out of the minds of humans. Okay, it's the 7th kingdom of life. And this 7th kingdom observes the same general trends that the other 6 kingdoms do. This movement towards ubiquity and diversity, towards specialization, towards complexity. It's the same thrust of this self-organizing force. So this 7th kingdom of life, that is technological, is following the same things. It wants the same things that life wants, which is very, very important, because that suggests to us something important about the world that we're inhabiting technologically that is compatible with life. Now, if you take a ancient hominoid stone flint hammer, it's about roughly the same size and weight and shape as a mouse for a computer. But I could probably make the stone hammer if I tried hard and maybe practiced for a couple of weeks. But under no circumstances could I ever make a computer mouse. It's beyond me, because it requires hundreds of other technologies that I'm not a master of. It is part of a system of technology. I call that system the technium. The technium is not a particular single technology, it's all technologies supporting each other together. So to make a saw today, you need a hammer. And to make a hammer, you need a saw. And that spread further is the way that works. So the mouse needs hammer, saw, factories, electronics. It needs thousands of other technologies. And most of the things we make today are codependent on the other technologies around them. That system is called the technium. And any system, including the technium, has its own agenda. That's the nature of systems. And just as plants want light, want is a very loaded English word. They move towards light, they bend towards light. They don't consciously want it in a conscious way, but they gravitate to it. Technology also has its tendencies, where it wants to go, even though it's not conscious. It has a bias, has an urgency, has a tendency. So it may just want power to run itself. I've seen a robot block myself, or try to get around me as I was blocking it from its power cord. So even though it's not conscious, they can have a want. And these are not specific destinations, these are general tendencies. Imagine for the moment rain falling down a river valley, and the thousands and millions of raindrops are falling down, but the individual path of any one of those raindrops is completely stochastic, it's random. We cannot predict it. But we can predict its direction, which is downward. for certainty. We can't say specifically where it's going to go, but it's going to go down. That's the level of what we're talking about. It's kind of like the water in a river valley. As it meanders around, we can't predict which part of the river it's going through, but we can say it's going to stay in the valley. So these valleys, these general directions, are what we can talk about. And so I would say that as soon as a civilization has electronic wires and silicon chips and radio waves, it's going to make the internet. It's going to make Wi-Fi. It's inevitable. Okay, and so these long-term trends can be predicted even though the specifics can't. It's sort of at the level of, we can say, if you have a planet with a gravity like the Earth, that you're going to have quadrupeds on it because that is a stable configuration physically, but you won't be able to predict zebras, which are much too specific. Okay, so the form, not the species. So we could say that once you have telephones, they're inevitable, but the iPhone's not. The internet was inevitable, but Twitter was not. So those are the general trends that we can talk about moving forward. And I would say, like right now, that AI is inevitable, even though the specific character and who controls it and who owns it, how it's run, is not at all inevitable, and they make those decisions, those choices make a big difference to us. So my definition of technology is anything useful produced by a mind. It could be the mind of a beaver or a bird as they make nests and dams, but it's also all the stuff that we make. And it is a mind thing. Technology is like thinking. It's a kind of thinking. And if I, right now, was to talk and give you a bad idea, you're not going to counsel me to stop thinking. You just say, well, that's a bad idea, stop thinking. But that's what we tend to do with technology. When bad technology comes up, people say, I want less of it. Let's turn down the technology. Let's stop the technology. Let's have less technology. But a better response is if we have a technology, say incandescent bulbs that run on tungsten that are very hot, waste a lot of energy. We say, okay, that's a bad idea. Let's have less light. No, that's like thinking less. Let's have a better idea. Let's make a better light bulb. Let's make better technology. Okay, so the proper response to a technology that is harmful, technology that doesn't work yet, technology that maybe is in some ways causes harm for the environment, is not less of it, but better of it. An example would be DDT, which turned out to be sprayed as a pesticide for plantations and farms, and it was horrible. Caused tremendous ecological devastation. But the problem was it was doing the wrong job. So DDT sprayed around, in small doses sprayed around a household, is the most effective malarial deterrent that we know of, saving hundreds of millions of lives a year. So it needed a better job. We could make a better version of it. So better ideas is what technology is. And it follows in the same thrust of all the things that life wanted, technology wants as well. It wants to become more complex. It wants to become more diverse. It wants to become more specialized. It wants to become more ubiquitous. It wants to become smarter over time. And it wants to evolve faster and faster. Technology wants clean water just like life does. We need clean water to make these highly specific manufacturing processes. It kind of wants the same thing that life wants. And in fact, we have never been able to make, or I should say, we have always been able to make a greener version of whatever we make. So we know that we can make greener and greener, more naturally compatible things because it is inherently like nature. So this is my second point, which is that technology is the acceleration of nature. It's not in opposition to it. It's compatible with it because it comes from it. And so it's in many ways just the extension of nature. And therefore, it's always within our powers to help direct it become more greener because we have not yet found any technology that we could not make greener. So the third point is that Technology generally create almost as many problems as they solve. New technologies create new problems. The new technologies of artificial intelligence will create fantastical new problems that we've never had before, and they will bring many new benefits. The trick that we want is to try to create 1% more than we ever destroy in a year. So it's not a very high bar. We just need to be 1% better than our worst. That means that maybe most of the stuff that we make may be garbage. It may be trash. We may have to throw it out. But that's okay as long as we have 1% more better in a year than we have trash, we can make civilization. Because that 1% difference between problems and solutions is all that we need to make civilization, because 1% compounded hourly or by daily or by the year is what civilization builds civilization. That's almost the definition of civilization, is the accumulation of 1% more that we create than we destroy every year. And the problem with 1% is that it's almost invisible. We can look around and we can hardly see 1%. That's why the world can seem to be terrible, in great trouble, if it's only 1% difference in the good and the bad. But that 1% progress, so to speak, is really only visible in retrospect. We have to look behind us to see. We have to look into history. We have to look into the past to see the fact that progress and that 1% difference is real. But that is what technology gives us. It brings us differences, options, possibilities, choices, freedoms, diversity. These are all the things. These are why hundreds of millions of humans every year in recent decades have moved from their villages into the cities, where it may not be the nicest place to live, because what they get out of that are choices and possibilities they don't have at home. At home, they may be in a village that has organic food, beautiful vistas. They have a strong sense of family and community support. They know who they are. But they leave to go into the city where things are uncertain, where it may be grimy and gritty. But they could be a mathematician. They could be a ballerina, which they could not be at home. They'd have to be a farmer or a farmer's wife. So they're moving into the cities because the cities are possibility factories, because they have all the choices that technology brings us. And that is what technology gives us in the end. Even though it may produce more problems, they are new problems. And each new problem is a possibility that did not exist before, and a possibility to make good in a new way. So this explosion of possibilities is what technology is moving towards, is what has brought us so far. And it's what is going to deliver us in the future. And I want to tell one story at the end. And that is the story of possibilities. Imagine for the moment that Mozart, the great musical genius, was born 2,000 years before he was born. He would have been maybe a farmer, or maybe he was a hunter-gatherer. There were no musical instruments like a piano or a symphony for his genius to take root and flower. So the world would have missed his genius, his musical genius. None of that stuff would have ever, any of his composers and symphonies would have ever been composed. And of course, Mozart himself would have missed that same genius as well, and that opportunity for his art. And we could also imagine the painter Van Gogh, who maybe he was born 5,000 years before oil paints were invented, in canvas, in brushes. And what a loss to the world that would have been, to miss his genius and of course, the genius that he would have missed himself, the pleasure of painting. And we can extend that to, you know, a filmmaker like Alfred Hitchcock. And if he had been born thousands of years before we had invented the technology of cinema, and all that would have been missing because of his genius. So what that means is that every generation we're inventing new technologies, and there are more people born who have a chance to express their genius because the technology is ready for them. So that means that someone like my son, who was 10 or 12 at this picture, is waiting for us, collectively, to invent a technology, the possibility for his genius to be expressed, because maybe it's a holographic display, maybe it's something else that we haven't yet have, that we're about to make, that will allow that genius to be expressed. So somewhere in the world today, there may be a Shakespeare of their time, and she's waiting for us, collectively as humans, to invent the tools to share, for her genius to shine. So we, in a certain sense, have a moral obligation to keep inventing new technologies and new possibilities, so with the hope that every person born on the planet and yet unborn may have a chance to use their special mix of talents in a way that would require this technology, and we can supply that to them, and they can therefore express it and share it. And that's why, even though when we're working on technology that may seem something that we may throw away, it may seem disposable, it may seem like it's something that's not important, it may seem that it's only commerce, or it's in some ways just part of capitalism, that's okay, because it is actually because it's bigger than that. Because when we are inventing new things, we are participating in that long arc that I'm talking about. This long arc that goes through from the beginning of the Big Bang and goes through the cosmos and through life and us. That long arc of increasing the possibilities in the universe. That's the long arc that we're participating in when we make and invent something new, is we are part of this process of expanding the possibilities, the choices, the opportunities in the universe, and especially for other people. And by the way, we're also expanding it for ourselves as a species. We may become more things than we are right now, and we will. So that's the possibility space that we're expanding, and that's what technology is about. It's about this long arc through the cosmos of expanding the possibilities, making them more and more and more possible. And that is the great thing that technology gives us. It increases possibilities. So, the three things about technology. One is that we are a techno-species. We're completely integrated. We are technological in many senses. We have long left the period where we're dependent on technology. We are wholly dependent on technology and forevermore. The second thing is that technology is a natural process. It's an acceleration of the natural self-organizing force in the universe. It is compatible with nature, with our choice. We can make it so. And the third thing is that this is a movement through the universe of increasing the possibilities for all beings, for all things. And when we participate in making new technologies, we are expanding that possibility space for all. And that's the good stuff about technology, and that is what technology wants. So thank you for your attention.
So we are back with Kevin right now for a few Q&A session. Thank you very much, Kevin. And thanks to your conclusion, perhaps some of us are realizing that the world didn't invent the technology that will allow us to be genius. So now we have an excuse. We arrived too late or too soon in the evolution. Thank you, Kevin. Of course, the talk is based on this book and mentioned it earlier. If you were fascinated by this talk, like we are, there is much more in the book, in fact, of course, because it's a book. It takes time to read it, but it's a wonderful book. And Kevin, you asked me last year, I am not translated in French, so good news for you. Now we have an opportunity with the French, a major French publisher that is interested to translate this book in French. So you can read it in English, and I assume that in a few months we will be able to have it also in French. So we will start, Kevin, with a question from a speaker, Peter Hinsen, this morning, who addressed this question to you. If you could time travel, to which period of time will you go?
I would go into the future about 500 years.
Okay.
I think anyone who goes into the past would be crazy, because I'm assuming that you don't get to choose who you are going to be or where you're going to be. And in general, you don't really want to have to live in the past. It may be a nice place to visit. But I would go into the future 500 years, because I think any more than that might be too disorienting. And 500 years, I think, would give me about the right amount of knowledge. And I assume this is a two-way round-trip ticket. I'm coming back, or do I have to live there? That may change my decision.
It's a kind of madness going to the past or in the future. I think both of them are quite dangerous. But as your answer is interesting. I don't think Peter Hinsen thought that you will answer this.
Okay. Answer. No, I have. Yes, I think it's a very good question. Because if you were to say you were going to be sent into the past and you didn't have a choice of where you were born, or whether you were born male or female, rich or poor, what year would you like to go into? Well, the further back you went, the worse it was going to be for you. And you really only would logically choose somewhere into the future. And that's because progress is real. I think there's a very strange idea that denies project. I call that kind of, well, Steven Pinker has a term for it, is progress-ophobe. They're afraid of progress. And I think we should not be afraid of progress, and we should not deny it. It's a real thing. And that's the first thing we have to kind of accept, is to get over that denial of progress.
Okay. So, Kevin, I'm taking questions as they arrive, so we might switch from topic to other topics. It's like that.
Yes.
Feel free to answer quickly, shortly, or to elaborate. Okay. It's up to you. So, got a question referring your metaphor with the river. Do you say that the pandemic changed the way the river goes, because we are always thinking about what happened in the past half a year? Do you think that pandemic has changed concerning the evolution?
I don't, because humanity has evolved and co-evolved with pandemics. Pandemics were very common. So it's nothing really new. The only new thing about this pandemic is the fact that it's the first global experience for the planet. This is the first time on this planet where every single person was affected by the same thing. So we've had pandemics in the past. And so the nature of a pandemic might have changed. So we now have a global force, a global awareness, and that is new. But the pandemic itself is ancient, and it's been much worse. I think where the change might be, the thing that has changed, is this awareness of our global culture. The fact that it's affected everybody on the planet who's alive. That had never happened before. And I think that move, that step towards a global organization, a global awareness, a planetary mind, is something new and does suggest about where we're going to go, which is that we have to treat and think globally. And that is a new thing for us.
Okay. Next question is nature. Would you say that nature has its own technology, so humans are not the only one to be able to modify our environment? Will you agree or no?
Yes. Anybody who lives in the world where beavers are present, these are small rodents in North America that can alter huge watersheds with their technology of dams. So they are building dams from their minds, much like a human might. They're not as complicated, but they're very powerful, and they alter the environment for their own benefit. And so it's a type of engineering, and birds make nests. And so we've had examples of technologies from the natural world. It's anything that a mind produces. It doesn't have to be a human mind.
Mm-hmm. Got a question from another speaker earlier this morning, Karen Lazari, specialist in security and hacking communities. Mm-hmm. Is asking you this question: what are some new technologies you have seen recently you're excited about?
Yes, so I am very excited by artificial intelligence, and I recognize that it is going to be one of the most powerful technologies we've ever invented. And the more powerful a technology is, the more powerfully it can be abused. So I'm excited, of course, not by the way it can be abused, but the way it can be used and its potential benefits. And I believe that there'll be many types of AIs, plural. There'll be hundreds of different varieties, just like we have different varieties of machines. We don't have one machine, we have many machines, and we'll have many AIs with different characters and different qualities and different problems. But I think that the level of change that will be brought about by this technology will be equivalent to what we saw with electricity, at least, and maybe even automation in general. And so it's very, very powerful. And there are many varieties of it. There are going to be many types, and they'll be different. There'll be many species. Let me put it that way. So that's, for me, the most exciting thing that covers many, many new opportunities.
And for those who are curious about that, then can have a look at your previous book, which was The Inevitable, that developed this aspect. I've got several questions regarding transhumanity or singularity, so I'm asking two of them, and you choose the way you want to answer. For you, does technology relate to transhumanism? And the other one is, do you think that there is a real technological singularity? I related those questions, but maybe it's not so
I will take those two separately. The first one about transhumanism, as you might have heard in my speech, I believe that we invented our own humanity and that we are still inventing it and changing it. So absolutely, we are already transhumans. We are already modifying our genes. We are, I mean, both in a classical sense and in engineering sense. And we will continue to change ourselves. So I think we are very mutable as a species. And if we take a very, very long view, we are going to keep changing ourselves. Now, there may be people like the Amish who or others who decide that they're not going to change. They and their children will not allow themselves to be changed genetically. And so we may actually have forking as we go over time, where some people are staying the same without changing the genes, and other people are changing things as fast as possible. So I think, yes, transhumanism is, I think, a native part of being human, the fact that we are changing ourselves. Yeah. But the singularity is a different idea, and there I am not as enthusiastic, because I think it's much more of a romantic fiction idea, that there is a destiny, that we're moving towards something, and that the idea of, for instance, super intelligence, I reject, because I think intelligence is not a single dimension. As I mentioned before, there's multiple AIs. Each of those AIs we'll have a different kind of intelligence. Intelligence is very complicated, many, many dimensions. There's not a single number. And when you talk about smarter than humans, that's reducing intelligence to one number, like the level of sound, amplitude, or decibels. It's ridiculous. So the idea that we achieve one point and we have one destiny that we're going to, I think that is unrealistic. I think we have multiple destinies, multiple things that we are trying to maximize. And so, so I'm not a fan of the singularity, which I think is almost a religion, a religious belief. And so transhumanism, yes. The singularity as a single destiny, no.
Yeah. I think the answer is quite clear. Thank you. Two related questions from my point of view. The first one is, isn't the price to pay for this 1% increase of better technologies the destruction of the non-renewable Earth resources? So in 500 years, we won't have humanity anymore, or at least forced low-tech humanity. And the second question is, you talk about not needing less technology, but what about the limited resources needed to produce all of technology? How do we keep developing technology with these planetary boundaries?
Right. Yes. So the interesting thing about things that we invent is that we don't necessarily need more atoms to invent new things. We can it's sort of like, take a language, you need French or English. There is a fixed number of words, but there's almost an infinite number of ideas we can make with the same words. We don't need to keep making new words, although we do, but we don't need an infinite number of words. We can make an infinite number of ideas with a fixed, finite number of words. And the same thing with inventions is that we don't have to keep using more stuff. We can make new things and new kinds of things with a limited number of resources. And we have substitutions, and that's the general thing that technology does, is it keeps substituting one kind of resource when it gets scarce with another kind of resource. And so we can imagine a kind of growth that's not about getting fatter and bigger and heavier, but a growth that is kind of like developmental, where you are becoming more complicated and more sophisticated. So instead of drinking more wine every year, you drink better wine, okay? And so that is the vision of the future of technology. It's not where we use more and more resources of the planet. We can use even less resources and yet make more things. A lot of those things may be virtual or intangible. They may be worlds that we enter into that don't require atoms at all. So we can imagine a version of the future that's very high tech, that uses less material than we do today. And that is what I meant by green.
Okay, two other questions that continue this discussion. The first one is, you have always been an optimistic voice. You recently won a long bet that the world has not yet collapsed. What gives you the most hope this day? Maybe explain what is a long bet for the audience briefly.
Yeah, long bets is a website that our foundation, the Long Now Foundation, which is trying to encourage people to take a long view of whatever they do. Imagine it taking generations, and you have future generations completing something. And part of that orientation is a belief in progress, and belief that things are getting better over time. And so my optimism comes from history, from looking back. Because once you look back, you realize that there is something that has gotten better. If you are really, really good and fair at looking at history, the academic evidence is very clear that we have progressed. And not just living longer on average, which is absolutely true, but in many other ways as well. And so one is history gives me optimism. And the second one is my optimism comes from children, from the next generation, who are always believing that things are possible and aren't, so I was to say, like, they don't know enough about how difficult things are, and so they're able to make new solutions. One of the things we did at Wired was we asked experts to make forecasts about the future in different narrow fields. And it turned out over 20 years, 25 years, that the worst predictors of the future were the experts. Because the experts were very aware of how difficult things were. And the people outside who had some knowledge but were not experts were not bound by the same difficulty. And they could imagine things being done differently, and that was usually what happened. And so sometimes knowing too much about how difficult things are prevent the real solutions from coming. And I think that's what the older generation have, is they've lived with the difficulties and they say, oh, that's impossible. But the children don't have that knowledge, and they can kind of imagine a different way, and they're not blinded by the known difficulties. And so that's why my optimism often comes from the children of the next generation.
So beware the experts. A question that is related to this optimistic approach, because in Homo Deus, Yuval Noah Harari described a dark future and links technology with happiness, and maybe you're aware about its work. Do you agree with him? Do you think there is a part of truth in the way you see the future, or do you disagree with the final point of view concerning the pessimistic approach concerning the future?
I think part of being human is having a hope for the future. I think every study we know about people who are in prison or people whose circumstances have reduced their ability to think about the future has shown that having a hope for the future makes us healthier, makes us more productive. So I think having a hope for the future is a fundamental character of being human. And I think part of the problem we have right now as a society, as a modern society, is that most of the pictures we have of the future are dystopian. They're not hopeful. Hollywood makes science fiction stories, and in all of them, the end is terrible. Their robots take over, or their economical or environmental disaster. And there's almost no Hollywood movies of a future that you would want to live in or that I would want to live in. And I think that really harms us. I think that is, first of all, untrue. I think we are going to make a future that we want to live in, but it's very hard to imagine what it is now. And that difficulty and the fact that disaster makes a better story means that we don't really have any pictures of a future in 100 years where we say, oh, I want to live there. And so, so I think that is sort of the assignment for us right now, is to make a picture of the future so that we can have hope for it at large scale.
Thank you for this answer. Another question: sometimes perfection is a barrier to action. It's a bad idea, it's a bad technology, I'm kidding. What is your advice for all of those who censor themselves because it's not good enough?
Yes. That is true. And one of the things that we learned from science that has been ported over to business and technology, at least in Silicon Valley, is the idea of rapid failure, of learning from failure. So you don't try to make things perfect, at least at the beginning. You try to just make them better than the last version. And you know that you accept the fact that a lot of what you produce will fail. You accept failure, you tolerate it, you even encourage it to some extent. That idea is very, very strange and still not prevalent in many countries where people are penalized for failing. If you start a business and you go out of business, that's considered a moral failure. You know, it's like, no, that's bad. You wasted people's money. Well, one of the things that Silicon Valley did was it change failure from a moral failure into it's a productive failure. It's the advance of science. And so the idea of trying to make something perfect before you ship, no, you don't even complete it. That's what releasing software in beta and alpha form is, that it's not even done yet. It's not anywhere near perfect. It's not even complete. And so I think that new paradigm of not trying to make things perfect is actually one of the greatest inventions that we've had in the last 2 decades.
So it's a great invention. Got a couple of questions regarding arts. The first one is, do you consider art as a technology? And the second one is, you've started a daily art project that you are sharing on Twitter. What inspired you to start this?
Yes. Absolutely. Art, which is an invention of our mind, is a technology. It requires technology, and the things that we produce are things that our mind makes. And so I would say absolutely is very, very close to technology. It's basically kind of art that is not so useful. It's cool and useless, but nonetheless, it is technological. And someone noticed that I have been producing a daily art. I got a new iPad and a pencil, and I'm making 1 painting a day. I'm doing it because I've discovered that you want to do things that are sometimes not productive. I have a new appreciation for the inefficiencies of life, because I've concluded that efficiency is for robots. Productivity is for robots. That's what robots are going to be doing more and more of, anything that you can measure in terms of productivity or efficiency. Humans are going to start doing the things that are inefficient, and art is hugely inefficient. And so I'm doing it in some senses to counteract the tendency to try to be efficient and productive in the rest of my life. And so this is a deliberate attempt to do something that's cool and useless in order to amplify my humanity.
A famous mathematician said in the USI conference a few years ago, if you want to have ideas, you need vacation. This is where ideas are coming most of the time. A question regarding Asia. You are most likely the person who has been most in Asia and who know better Asia. How have these 4 decades of travel impact your thoughts about technology and where it is taking us?
Yes, so this is true. I have traveled throughout Asia for actually 50 years, and I've been in most of the Asian countries between Turkey and Japan, and Siberia and Indonesia. And during that time, I've learned several things from Asia. One is I also got a sense of optimism, because before my very eyes, I saw countries, areas that were living in medieval era rise to not just modern level, but even become the future. Places like the east coast of China, which is futuristic cities, much more futuristic than anything in America. And I saw with my own eyes that that was possible to change people within 1 generation. And that made me very optimistic. And the second thing that Asia has really brought home to me is the value of thinking differently. And this is even more and more important, because we're making a technology that is binding us together in kind of an internet way, where we have all the living adults on the planet, 6 billion adults, who are connected to each other all the time, day and night, 365 days a year. And when we're all connected together, it gets very difficult to have a new idea, to think differently. And thinking differently is the foundation of wealth and innovation and everything else in our society. So how do we think differently when we're all connected together. And I think my travels in Asia has really persuaded me that trying to retain ways of thinking differently, trying to cultivate doing things differently is one of the major traits that we want to cultivate in ourselves as we go forward. And so that Asia journey has really persuaded me of the value of thinking differently.
And the journey is far from being finished, of course. Maybe the last question, very briefly in 30 seconds. I'm sorry for this time. Concerning religion, there is. Do you think there is a future in which religion reflects technology and technology reflect religion? Because there is something behind your talk that seems to combine both of them. You said something like there is more of God in a cell phone than in a frog, for example, something like that. So in 30 seconds, sorry, Kevin.
I think the idea that we are connected to something larger than ourselves, which is what I talk about, this arc of technology, is a religious sentiment. I think it's important that we be connected to something bigger than ourselves, which is what one definition of religion. And I think that it's possible to see technology as having a spiritual dimension. And so I would say, rather than think of it as being alien and cold and anti-human, I think technology is a divine reflection of the divine.
Thank you very much, Kevin. I don't know if there is a God, but I know there is an Uber geek, and it was with us this evening at the USI event. Thank you very much, and have a nice day, because I think it's early in the morning for you, maybe.
It is.
Thank you.
What a pleasure to be here chatting with you. I wish I was in Paris, but this is second best, and I am really thankful for your interest in my work, and I appreciate your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for all the questions.